had been on Outpost 9 for exactly 3 months when her life changed forever. She was 22 years old, fresh out of the academy, and working as a trainee in the xenobiology department. It was not a glamorous job. Mostly, she cleaned sample containers and organized data files while the senior scientists did the real work. The outpost floated in orbit around a massive gas giant in a region of space called the Draconis Expanse. The elder races, those ancient species who had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, had declared this entire sector forbidden. No colonies were allowed, no mining operations, no research stations. But the coalition of species needed a refueling depot in this part of space, and humans had a reputation for building things in places where they were not supposed to build them. That was what humans did. They pushed boundaries. They asked questions that others refused to ask. Sometimes this got them into trouble. Sometimes it led to discoveries that changed everything. On that particular night, could not sleep. Her quarters were small, and the recycled air always smelled slightly wrong. She decided to take a walk through the station. Hopping the movement would tire her out. Without really thinking about where she was going, she found herself in the maintenance tunnels beneath the main deck. These tunnels were old and rarely used. Cables and pipes ran along the walls, carrying power and water to different parts of the station. The lights flickered because no one bothered to fix them down here, like the quiet. She liked being alone with her thoughts. Then she heard a sound. It was soft, almost like a whisper, a scraping noise followed by something that might have been a whimper. Stopped walking and listened. The sound came again from somewhere ahead of her in the darkness. She should have called security. She should have gone back to her quarters and reported the strange noise. That was what the training manual said to do, but had always been curious, sometimes too curious for her own good. She moved forward, following the sound. In a small alcove behind a broken ventilation unit, she found it. The creature was no bigger than a house cat. Its body was covered in scales that seemed to shift color as watched, moving between deep black and rich violet. It had 4 legs, 2 wings, and a long tail that curled around its body. One of the wings hung at a bad angle, clearly broken. Dark liquid, perhaps blood, pooled beneath it. But it was the eyes that made freeze. They were large and golden, with pupils that were vertical slits like a snake. But there was something in those eyes that did not belong in an animal. Intelligence, awareness, age. Those eyes looked at like they had seen the birth and death of stars. "Hey there," whispered, keeping her voice soft and gentle. "I am not going to hurt you." The creature watched her. It did not try to run or attack. It simply observed as if judging her. Slowly removed her jacket. It was standard issue, gray and ugly, but it was warm and soft. She moved toward the creature one small step at a time, always keeping her hands visible. The creature tensed but did not move. Her comm unit buzzed. The station's artificial intelligence spoke in her ear. "Trainee, you are in a restricted section. Please return to authorized areas immediately." Reached up and turned off her comm. When she was close enough, she gently wrapped her jacket around the creature. It hissed at her, a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. But it did not bite. It did not scratch. It let her pick it up and hold it against her chest. The creature was surprisingly light, as if its bones were hollow. Could feel its heart beating rapidly against her hands. It was scared. It was hurt. And for some reason she could not explain, she knew that she could not leave it here to die. Getting back to her quarters without being seen was not easy. The station had cameras everywhere, and the AI monitored all movement. But it spent 3 months learning the patterns, figuring out which routes were watched less carefully, finding the blind spots that existed in any security system. She made it to her room without being stopped. Once inside, she laid the creature on her bed and examined its injuries. The wing was definitely broken, but it was a clean break. She had some basic medical training, enough to know what needed to be done. She found composite strips meant for repairing cables and used them to create a splint. The creature watched her work with those ancient, knowing eyes. "I am going to call you Ember," said as she finished securing the splint. "Because of your scales, they look like dying coals." Ember made a soft sound, something between a purr and a chirp, chose to interpret it as approval. She found emergency ration bars in her storage locker and broke one into small pieces. She was not sure if the creature could eat human food, but she had nothing else to offer. To her relief, Ember accepted the food, eating each piece carefully and neatly. That night did not sleep. She sat on the floor beside her bed, watching the strange creature she had rescued. She knew she was breaking multiple regulations. She knew she could lose her position, maybe even face criminal charges, for keeping an unknown alien species in her quarters. The rules were very clear about such things. But every time she thought about reporting the creature, she looked into those golden eyes and felt something she could not explain. A connection. A sense that this meeting was not an accident. That somehow, across the vast emptiness of space, they had been meant to find each other. As the station's artificial lights slowly brightened to simulate morning, Ember lifted its head and looked at. Then, very slowly and very deliberately, it pressed its snout against her palm. Smiled. "Okay," she said quietly. "I will keep your secret, but you have to keep mine too. Deal?" Ember closed its eyes and made that purring sound again. And so it began. A human trainee and a creature from the darkness of forbidden space, bound together by an act of simple kindness. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. Neither of them understood the forces that were already beginning to move around them. But in that moment, none of that mattered. In that moment, there was only a girl who had found something lost and broken and had chosen to help it heal. It was such a small decision, such a human thing to do. It would change the fate of the galaxy. 3 weeks passed, and began to realize that Ember was not a normal creature. The first sign was the growth. When she had found Ember in the maintenance tunnels, the creature had been small enough to fit in her arms. Now it was the size of a large dog and still getting bigger. Its scales had grown thicker and darker, and the broken wing had healed completely. When Ember stretched those wings in the limited space of quarters, they nearly touched both walls. She could not keep Ember in her room anymore. Someone would notice, someone would hear, so found another solution. Cargo Bay 7 had been marked as damaged and offline for over a year. A small meteor had punched through the outer hull during a storm, and the repair crews had sealed it rather than fix it properly. No one went there. No one checked on it. The manifest listed it as empty and unusable. Spent 2 nights secretly repairing the life support systems in the cargo bay. She brought in blankets and water containers and emergency food supplies. Then she moved Ember to its new home. The second sign that something was wrong came when noticed Ember's behavior. Normal animals acted on instinct. They ate when hungry, slept when tired, and reacted to danger with fear or aggression. Ember did none of these things. Instead, Ember seemed to think, to plan, to observe and learn. One evening found Ember arranging small objects on the cargo bay floor. Bolts and screws and bits of broken equipment had been sorted by size and shape, then placed into geometric patterns. Perfect circles, precise triangles, spirals that curved inward with mathematical accuracy. "What are you doing?" asked. Ember looked at her with those golden eyes but did not answer. Of course it could not answer. It was just an animal. Except was becoming less sure of that every day. The third sign came when Ember started humming. It was not a random sound. It was a specific frequency, low and resonant, that made teeth ache and her vision blur at the edges. When Ember hummed, the lights in the cargo bay flickered. The temperature dropped, and felt something pressing against her mind like fingers trying to open a door. She asked the station's computer about sonic frequencies that could affect human perception. The computer gave her a long list of theoretical phenomena, most of them classified as impossible or unexplained. None of them matched what Ember was doing. The fourth sign was the most disturbing. One night, arrived at the cargo bay to find Ember staring at a data terminal that had been left behind when the bay was abandoned. The screen was dark and the terminal had no power, but Ember stared at it as if reading something fascinating. When Ember noticed watching, it turned away from the terminal almost guiltily. "You understand more than you should," said slowly, "don't you?" Ember tilted its head in that way. It always did when spoke. "What are you, really?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Ember moved to an empty section of floor where dust had gathered over the months of abandonment. With one clawed foot, the creature began to draw. A spiral, a circle, a straight line passing through both. His heart stopped. She knew that symbol. Everyone who worked in xenobiology knew it. It had been found carved into ruins on a dozen dead worlds across the galaxy. Theta Cygni, Vale, the ghost stations of Andromeda, ancient places, impossibly old, left behind by a species that had vanished before any current civilization had evolved. The elder races refused to discuss those ruins. Whenever human scientists asked questions, they were told that some knowledge was too dangerous for young species. The symbol was part of that forbidden mystery. And now Ember had drawn it on the floor of an abandoned cargo bay. "No," whispered, "that is not possible." Her comm unit buzzed, making her jump. She fumbled to answer it, her hands shaking. "Trainee." The voice belonged to Doctor, the station's lead scientist. He was one of the elder races, a being made of living crystal that thought in frequencies humans could barely perceive. "Report to my office immediately." The connection ended before could respond. She looked at Ember. The creature had stopped drawing and was watching her with an expression that might have been concern or warning. "Stay here," said. "Stay hidden, I will be back soon." She did not know if Ember understood her words, but when she left the cargo bay and sealed the door behind her, she felt those golden eyes following her, burning into her back like twin suns. Doctor's office was in the science wing of the station. The room was kept cold and dry, conditions that the preferred. When entered, she saw Doctor standing by the viewport, his crystalline body catching and refracting the light from the gas giant outside. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Obeyed. "You have been visiting Cargo Bay 7. Doctor spoke in the flat, harmonic tones of his species. "Every night for the past 2 weeks. Do not bother to deny it. I have been monitoring you." His mouth went dry. "Sir, I can explain." "Can you?" Now Doctor turned and saw that his crystal form was pulsing with colors she had never seen before. Reds and oranges and deep, angry purples. The displayed emotion through color, and these colors meant fear. "Can you explain why you are sheltering a creature from the forbidden zones? Can you explain how that creature came to be on this station in the first place? Can you explain what it is?" "It was hurt," said weakly. "I found it in the maintenance tunnels and it was hurt. I just wanted to help." Doctor made a sound like breaking glass. It was the equivalent of a bitter laugh. "You wanted to help," he repeated. "Child, you have no understanding of what you have done. The thing in that cargo bay is not a wounded animal. It is not some exotic species waiting to be studied." He moved closer and had to fight the urge to step back. The cold radiating from his crystal body made her breath mist in the air. "What you are sheltering is called a progenitor. They are the architects of this galaxy. They created the stars and shaped the worlds. They seeded life on 1,000,000 planets and guided its evolution across billions of years. And then, 300 million years ago, they vanished. We thought they were extinct. We thought they were gone forever." Shook her head. "That is just a legend, stories that the elder races tell." "It is not a legend." Doctor's colors darkened. "We scattered their eggs across forbidden space to prevent exactly this scenario. They were meant to sleep forever, lost in the darkness between stars. But somehow, impossibly, one of those eggs has hatched. He looked directly into his eyes, and she saw something she had never seen in an elder race before: terror. The conclave has been summoned. The other elder races are already coming. They will demand the creature's destruction. No, the word came out before could stop it. You do not understand. That thing is a god in larval form. And you, a human trainee with no knowledge of what you have done, have somehow bonded with it. Doctor turned back to the viewport. The gas giant storm swirled in the darkness, massive and uncaring. The conclave arrives in 2 days. Pray to whatever spirits your species believes in, child, because when they get here, nothing will save that creature. He paused. And I am not certain anything will save you either. The ships of the elder races arrived on the 2nd day, just as Doctor had promised. Watched them from the observation deck, her stomach tight with fear. There were 5 of them, and each one was larger than Outpost 9 itself. They did not look like human ships. They did not look like anything had ever seen. One seemed to be made entirely of crystal, like a giant version of the. Another was a sphere of pure darkness that swallowed the starlight around it. A third pulsed with mathematical equations that scrolled across its surface, visible somehow even across the emptiness of space. These were the rulers of the galaxy, the species that had mastered faster-than-light travel while humans were still learning to use fire. The beings that looked at humanity the way humans looked at insects. And they had come for Ember. Had spent the 2 days of waiting trying to prepare. She had talked to Ember, though she was not sure how much the creature understood. She had explained that dangerous people were coming. She had promised that she would protect Ember no matter what happened. Ember had listened with those ancient golden eyes, and had pressed its snout against her palm, the same way it had on that first night. Now the time for preparation was over. Station security had come to quarters that morning with orders to bring her to the central hub. They had also brought Ember, leading the creature with magnetic restraints that hummed with barely contained energy. Ember had grown again. It now reached hip when standing on all 4 legs, and its wingspan was easily twice her height. The dark violet scales seemed to absorb the light around them, making Ember look like a hole cut in the fabric of reality. The central hub was the largest open space on the station, normally used for assemblies and ceremonies. Today it had been transformed into something else. The furniture had been removed. Strange devices had been set up around the perimeter, devices that did not recognize but that made her skin crawl with wrongness. And in the center of the room stood the representatives of the elder races. The delegate was like Doctor but larger, older, its crystal body clouded with age and experience. Next to it floated Anne, a being that had no physical form at all but existed as a cloud of probability and calculation. The air around it shimmered with numbers and equations that appeared and disappeared too fast for human eyes to follow. The collective was represented by a single body, but knew that body contained thousands of individual minds linked together into one consciousness. It stood perfectly still, its silicon skin reflecting the lights of the hub like a mirror. There were 2 others that could not identify. One was tall and thin, wrapped in robes that seemed to be made of frozen time. The other was not visible at all, only present as a pressure against mind, a weight that made it hard to think. Doctor stood to one side, his colors muted and subdued. When entered with Ember, he would not meet her eyes. "The human trainee," said the delegate. Its voice rang through the hub like a bell, and the progenitor stood as straight as she could. Ember pressed against her leg and she felt the creature trembling. Or maybe she was the one trembling. It was hard to tell. "The progenitor must be eliminated," said the. Its voice was strange, a cascade of clicking sounds that somehow formed words in its mind. "We have calculated the probabilities. If this creature is allowed to mature, The statistical likelihood of catastrophic outcomes approaches certainty. "It has not hurt anyone," said. Her voice sounded small and weak in the vast space of the hub. "It is just a baby. It is scared and alone, and it has done nothing wrong." "Not yet," said the collective. 1,000 voices spoke in perfect unison. "But we remember what the progenitors were. We remember what they did. They shaped the stars and created the species that would become the elder races. But then they fought among themselves, and that war nearly destroyed everything. Galaxies died in their conflict. Entire dimensions were erased from existence." "That was 300 million years ago," said. "This is a different creature. It is not responsible for what its ancestors did." The invisible presence pushed harder against her mind. She felt it trying to read her thoughts, trying to understand why she was defending this thing. She pushed back with all her will, and for a moment the pressure eased. "The human is emotionally compromised," said the tall being in the robes of frozen time. Its voice was slow, each word taking an eternity to form. "It has formed a bond with the progenitor. Its judgment cannot be trusted." "My judgment is fine," snapped. She knew she should be respectful, should be humble before these ancient and powerful beings. But anger was building inside her, burning away her fear. "You are the ones whose judgment should be questioned. You found eggs, the children of the most powerful species in galactic history, and instead of studying them or trying to understand them, you hid them in forbidden space and hoped they would never wake up." The hub fell silent. Even the numbers flowing around the seemed to slow. "You were afraid," continued. "You are still afraid. And now that one of them has woken up anyway, your only solution is to kill it, because that is easier than admitting you made a mistake." The delegate's colors shifted to angry red. "You are a child speaking of things you do not understand. Humanity has been a spacefaring species for less than 300 years. We have guided the galaxy for millions of years. You do not have the wisdom to judge us." "Maybe not," said. "But I know the difference between right and wrong, and killing a baby because you are afraid of what it might become is wrong." She felt Ember tense beside her. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with something ancient and powerful. The lights began to flicker. The collective took a step back. "It is awakening. We must act now before it reaches full power." "The human has delayed us too long," said the invisible presence. "Destroy them both." Wrapped her arms around Ember, putting her body between the creature and the elder races. She knew it was a useless gesture. She knew she could not protect Ember from beings who had existed before her species had evolved. But she refused to step aside. "No," she said. And then Ember moved. The creature stepped forward, gently pushing aside. And as it moved, it changed. Its body stretched and grew, bones lengthening, scales expanding. Its wings unfurled, impossibly vast, filling the entire hub with shadow. Its neck extended upward, and its head, now the size of a small vehicle, rose toward the ceiling. The elder races scrambled backward. The devices around the perimeter sparked and failed. The invisible presence vanished entirely, fleeing from something more powerful than itself. Ember opened its mouth, and when it spoke, its voice resonated through every frequency of reality at once. Felt the words in her bones, in her blood, in the very atoms of her body. "She is correct," the progenitor said. The words echoed through the hub, through the station, through the ships of the elder races waiting outside. "She is correct." And everything changed. The being that had been Ember now filled the central hub with its presence. It was no longer a creature that could be measured in normal terms. Its body seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3, folding in on itself in ways that made its eyes water when she tried to look directly at it. Its scales had become like windows into deep space, each one containing swirling galaxies and burning stars. Its wings were made of something that was not quite matter, stretching out beyond the walls of the hub as if the physical structure of the station was only a suggestion. Its eyes, still golden but now vast beyond comprehension, looked down at the assembled elder races with an expression that was almost gentle. The representatives of the conclave had pressed themselves against the walls, their ancient power meaningless before this awakened god. The delegate's crystal form had cracked, thin lines spreading across its surface. The sequations had scattered into chaos. Even the collective, normally so controlled and unified, was trembling. Only stood in the center of the room, looking up at what Ember had become. "We did not disappear," the progenitor said. Its voice was not sound in the normal sense. It was vibration that existed at every level of reality at once, from the quantum to the cosmic. "We chose to sleep. We chose to end the cycle of creation and destruction that had consumed us for billions of years." The elder races said nothing. They could not speak. They could barely think in the presence of this awakened power. "Do you know what we were?" the progenitor continued. "We were the first. Before your species existed, before your worlds had cooled, before your stars had formed, we were there. We shaped the universe according to our will. We created galaxies as art. We designed physics as poetry. Every species that has ever evolved, every world that has ever supported life, exists because we made it so." The progenitor's head lowered slightly, and something like sadness passed across its vast features. "But we grew proud. We grew arrogant. We began to disagree about the nature of creation, about what the universe should become, and those disagreements became conflicts. Those conflicts became wars, and those wars—" The progenitor closed its eyes for a moment. "The wars destroyed more than you can imagine. Entire realities were unmade. The fabric of existence itself was torn. By the time we realized what we had done, it was almost too late." The eyes opened again, fixing on the elder races. "So we chose to sleep. We scattered our eggs across the forbidden zones, and we gave them a single instruction: wait, watch, and awaken only when a species proves worthy of our return." The delegate finally found its voice. The words came out broken and weak. "Worthy? What does that mean? What were you waiting for?" "For 300 million years, you have failed the test," the progenitor said. "You found our eggs and hid them in fear. You built great civilizations on the ruins of what we left behind, but you never asked why we left. You never wondered what we were trying to teach you. You grew powerful and ancient and wise by the standards of mortal species, but you did not grow in the one way that mattered." The progenitor turned its head toward. Despite its terrifying power, despite its impossible size, its expression was warm. "Until her," shook her head. "I did not do anything special. I just found a wounded creature and helped it. That is what any decent person would do." "Yes," the progenitor said. "That is exactly what any decent person would do, and that is what makes you extraordinary." The progenitor moved closer to, somehow shrinking its form enough to meet her eyes without crushing her beneath its presence. "You found something small and broken in the darkness. You had no idea what it was. You had no reason to believe it would ever repay your kindness. You knew you were breaking your own laws, risking your own position and potentially your own freedom, but you helped anyway." The progenitor's voice softened. "And then, when the most powerful beings in the galaxy demanded that I be destroyed, you stood between them and me. A single human with no weapons, no powers, no special abilities. You stood against the rulers of the cosmos and said no." Tears were running down's face. She did not know when she had started crying. "This is what we were waiting for," the progenitor said. "Not strength, not intelligence, not technological advancement or military might. We were waiting for compassion, for kindness given freely to the unknown, for courage that comes from love rather than power." The progenitor turned back to the elder races. "You have had 300 million years to show us this. 300 million years to prove that the galaxy we created was worth preserving. Instead, you hoarded knowledge. You controlled younger species. You built hierarchies and empires and systems of power. You never once considered that the smallest and weakest among you might have value." The being's voice grew harder. But she did. This human, this child by your standards, this member of a species that has barely left its home world. She saw a wounded creature and she showed it love. That is the wisdom we were seeking. That is the proof we needed. The delegate fell to its knees, crystal chiming against the floor. What will you do to us? Nothing, the progenitor said. I am not here to punish you. I am not here to destroy or remake or control. That was the mistake my kind made before, and I will not repeat it. The vast head turned back to, I am here to help, to repair what is broken, to heal what is wounded, but I cannot do it alone. Power without compassion leads to the same destruction that ended my species. I need someone to guide me, someone to remind me why creation matters, someone to speak for the small and the weak and the forgotten. His heart was pounding. You want me to? I want you to be my voice, the progenitor said, to speak for me to all peoples, to all worlds. When I reshape the broken places of the galaxy, you will guide my hand. When I must make decisions that affect billions of lives, you will remind me what matters most. I am nobody, whispered. I am just a trainee. I have no qualifications, no experience, no authority. You have something better, the progenitor said. You have a good heart, and that is the only qualification that matters. The vast being lowered its head until its eye was level with his face. In that eye, she saw galaxies being born and dying, stars igniting and fatting, the entire history of the universe reflected in gold. Will you help me? Will you teach me how to be kind? Looked at this god, this ancient and terrible power that had chosen her for reasons she still did not fully understand. She thought about everything she had ever learned, everything she had ever believed about her place in the universe. Then she remembered a small, wounded creature in the darkness of the maintenance tunnels. She remembered wrapping it in her jacket and promising to keep it safe. Yes, she said, I will help you. The progenitor made a sound that might have been a purr, if a purr could shake the foundations of reality. Then let us begin. The galaxy changed after the Day of Awakening. That was what people called it, the day when the progenitor revealed itself on Outpost 9 and announced that the universe would never be the same. In the months that followed, other progenitors began to wake. Across the forbidden zones, in the dark spaces between stars, eggs that had slept for 300 million years stirred and hatched. But they did not come in anger or destruction. They came in peace, drawn by the signal that Ember, the first of the awakened, had sent across the cosmos. They came because they had heard that a human had shown kindness to one of their own. Became the voice of the progenitors, just as Ember had asked. It was not a role she had ever expected or wanted. She was still the same person who had cleaned sample containers and organized data files 3 months before. She still felt awkward at formal gatherings and tongue-tied when speaking to important officials. But Ember stayed by her side always, and somehow that made everything easier. The progenitors did not take over the galaxy. They did not impose their will on the younger species or demand worship from the elder races. Instead, they offered help. Simple, practical, miraculous help. A dying star in the Andromeda cluster was stabilized, giving new life to 3 inhabited systems that had been preparing for evacuation. A plague that had swept through the outer colonies was cured in a single day when a progenitor analyzed the disease and designed a treatment that human doctors could manufacture. Broken ecosystems were repaired. Failing atmospheres were restored. Problems that had seemed impossible were solved as if they were trivial. But the progenitors never acted alone. Before every intervention they consulted with. They asked her whether the help was wanted. They asked whether it would cause more harm than good. They asked what a kind person would do. And who had never thought of herself as special, found that she knew the answers. The elder races struggled to adjust to this new reality. For millions of years, they had been the guides and protectors of the galaxy. Now they were just another set of voices among many. Some of them accepted this with grace. Others fought against it, trying to maintain their old power and influence. But gradually, even the most resistant came to understand that the progenitors were not interested in power. They were interested in healing. And as the years passed and the galaxy grew healthier and more peaceful, the old hierarchies began to fade. Humanity's role changed too. They were no longer the young species, the newcomers who had to earn their place at the table. They were the species that had produced the voice of the progenitors. They were the ones who had shown that compassion mattered more than power. Other species began to look at humanity differently. They began to ask what it was about humans that had allowed one of them to pass the test that the elder races had failed. They began to study human history, human culture, human philosophy. What they found confused them at first. Humans were violent and peaceful, cruel and kind, selfish and generous. They had committed terrible crimes against each other and had also shown remarkable acts of sacrifice and love. They were messy and complicated and contradictory. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the progenitors had not been looking for a perfect species. Perhaps they had been looking for a species that understood what it meant to struggle, a species that knew failure and still chose to try again, a species that had darkness in its heart but still reached for the light. Thought about this often as she traveled between worlds, speaking for the progenitors, helping to mediate disputes and guide reconstruction efforts. She never stopped feeling like someone who had wandered into a role that was too big for her. But she never stopped trying either. Years passed, decades, grew old as humans do, her hair turning gray and her face gaining lines that mapped a life of service and travel. But Ember never changed. The progenitor remained by her side, as vast and ancient as ever, but also somehow still the scared creature she had found in the maintenance tunnels all those years ago. On the day died, she was 134 years old. Medical technology had extended human considerably, but even that had limits. She lay in a bed on a world that had been nothing but barren rock when she was born, now covered with forests and oceans that the progenitors had helped create. Ember was there, of course. The progenitor had reduced its form to something almost small, barely larger than it had been when first found it. It lay beside her bed, its head resting on the covers near her hand. "Thank you," Ember said. Its voice was gentle now, lacking the cosmic resonance of its full power. "For everything." Smiled. Her eyes were closed, but she could still see Ember in her mind, as clearly as she had seen it on that first night in the maintenance tunnels. "I just helped a wounded creature," she said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Ember said, "they would not. That is what made you special." Breathing slowed. She felt herself drifting, letting go of a body that had carried her for so many years. "Will you remember me?" she asked. "Forever," Ember promised. "For as long as the stars burn and the galaxies turn, for as long as there is a universe to remember in, I will carry you with me." His hand found Ember's snout one last time. She felt the scales, warm and smooth, under her palm. "Take care of them," she whispered. "All of them. The small ones and the big ones, the strong ones and the weak ones. Promise me." "I promise." Voice of the progenitors died with a smile on her face. Ember carried her body to the heart of a newborn star, one of the first that the progenitors had created in this new age. The star burned brighter as it received her, sending light out across the galaxy in every direction. Across 1,000 worlds, humans looked up at the sky and saw the star shining brighter than before. They felt something they could not explain, a warmth, a sense of gratitude, a blessing from something ancient and powerful. In the records of every civilization, the story was preserved and passed down through generations. The story of a trainee who found a wounded creature in the dark. The story of a human who showed kindness when no one was watching. The story of how that small act of compassion had awakened the gods and changed the fate of the universe. A human trainee assisted a dragon hatchling, unaware of what it would evolve into. But perhaps that was the most important part of the story. She had not known. She had not helped Ember because she expected something in return. She had not calculated the potential benefits or weighed the possible outcomes. She had simply seen something hurt and alone, and she had chosen to help. That was all. That was everything. That was what made humanity worthy. And across the stars, in every corner of the galaxy that humans had touched, the progenitors continued their work of healing and creation. They remembered with every act of kindness, with every choice to help rather than harm, with every moment of compassion freely given. She had taught them what it meant to be good, and they would never forget.